Ambassador Kethvar had witnessed the destruction of 17 worlds. He had negotiated peace between species that communicated through spores and others that existed as living plasma. He had seen empires rise and fall across the spiral arms of the galaxy. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the moment he would watch a single human mother tear apart a Vorthack war machine with her bare hands to save her child. The galactic community had spent centuries trying to understand why every species that encountered humanity either fled in terror or immediately sought alliance. Today, Kethvar would learn that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology, their numbers, or their military might. It was something far more terrifying, something that made even the most advanced civilizations question everything they thought they knew about survival, sacrifice, and the true meaning of strength. What he witnessed that day would change not just his understanding of humans, but the very foundation of galactic civilization itself. Ambassador Kethvar stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic station, his 4 eyes tracking the human colony ships as they approached the neutral zone. The Galactic Council had assigned him to oversee first contact protocols with this newly discovered human settlement on Kepler 442b. Standard procedure for a species that had only achieved interstellar travel 3 decades ago. The humans called their colony New Eden. Population: roughly 50,000 souls, mostly families who had volunteered for the long journey to establish humanity's first permanent foothold beyond their solar system. Kethvar had reviewed their files extensively. Farmers, engineers, teachers, doctors. Simple people seeking a new life among the stars. What concerned the Council wasn't the humans themselves, but the pattern. In the past 30 years, 17 different species had encountered humanity. 12 had immediately requested defensive pacts. 3 had relocated their entire civilizations to the far rim of the galaxy. 2 had simply vanished, leaving behind empty worlds and hastily abandoned settlements. The Vorthack Empire, however, had chosen a different approach. Kethvar's communication implant chimed softly. His aide, a young Centaurian named Reldos, transmitted directly to his consciousness. Ambassador, we're receiving distress signals from the human colony. Multiple ships approaching their perimeter. Through the station's enhanced viewing system, Kethvar could see them now. Vorthack vessels, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with sickly green light. The Vorthack were an ancient species, older than the Galactic Council itself. They had conquered or absorbed 47 civilizations in the past millennium. Their philosophy was simple. Strength determined survival. Weakness deserved extinction. Sir, Reldos continued, his mental voice tight with concern. The Vorthack commander is broadcasting on all frequencies. They're demanding the humans surrender their world for proper integration into the Empire. Kethvar had seen this before. The Vorthack would test the humans, probe their defenses, measure their response. If the humans showed appropriate fear and submission, they might be allowed to exist as a vassal species. If they resisted, the first human response came through the communication array. A woman's voice, calm and steady despite the circumstances. This is Governor Sarah Chun of New Eden Colony. You are in violation of our territorial space. Please state your intentions and withdraw to a safe distance. Kethvar's assistant gasped mentally. The humans were demanding the Vorthack withdraw. Even the mighty Keltharian Federation had offered tribute when first confronted by a Vorthack fleet. The Vorthack commander's response was predictable. Primitive species. You will submit or be cleansed. You have 1 rotation of your planet to surrender. What happened next would be remembered across the galaxy for generations. Governor Chin's voice returned to the airwaves, but something had changed. The diplomatic politeness was gone, replaced by something that made Kethvar's scales ripple with unease. Commander, this is our home. These are our children, our families, our future. If you want this world, you'll have to take it from our dead hands. The transmission cut off. Kethvar had heard similar declarations before. Many species spoke bravely when faced with overwhelming odds. What made his blood run cold wasn't the words themselves, but the tone. Governor Chan hadn't sounded afraid, angry, or even particularly concerned. She had sounded like someone stating a simple, immutable fact. The Vorthak fleet positioned themselves in attack formation. 300 vessels against a small colony with minimal defenses. The outcome seemed inevitable. Then, the sensors started detecting anomalies. Ambassador Reldos transmitted, his mental voice confused. I'm reading massive energy signatures from the planet's surface. The humans, they're doing something. Kethvar adjusted the viewing array's focus. New Eden colonies spread across a verdant valley, surrounded by purple-leafed forests and crystal-clear lakes. Beautiful, peaceful, utterly defenseless. Except it wasn't. The first indication came from the settlement's outer perimeter. Buildings began to shift and transform. What had appeared to be simple agricultural structures revealed themselves as concealed defensive platforms. Grain silos opened like flowers, exposing massive railgun batteries. Schools and hospitals sprouted missile pods from hidden compartments. By the void, Reldos whispered mentally. The entire colony is a fortress. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. As Kethvar watched, humans began emerging from their homes. Not running for shelter, not evacuating their children to safety. Instead, they were taking up positions alongside the defensive installations. Men and women, teenagers and elderly, all moving with the practiced efficiency of trained soldiers. A child, no more than 10 years old by human standards, helped her grandmother load ammunition into an anti-ship cannon. A man in farming clothes kissed his wife goodbye before climbing into what had disguised itself as a tractor, but was clearly some kind of combat mech. Reldos, Kethvar said aloud, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Are we reading this correctly? Are the human civilians actually preparing to fight? Yes, sir. All of them. Even the children who aren't old enough to operate weapons are helping with logistics and communications. This violated every principle of galactic civilization. When faced with superior force, rational species surrendered, negotiated, or fled. They protected their young and their weak. They preserved their culture and their future. They didn't arm kindergarten teachers and ask elderly shopkeepers to man defensive positions against an empire that had obliterated worlds. The Vorthak seemed equally confused. Their bioships began broadcasting what Kethvar recognized as psychological warfare transmissions. Images of destroyed worlds, recordings of screaming populations, detailed descriptions of what happened to species that resisted. The humans' response was to start singing. At first, it was just a few voices coming through the communication channels. Then more joined in. Within minutes, the entire colony was participating in what their database identified as an ancient human war song, something called the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Kethvar had studied thousands of species across the galaxy. He had never encountered one that responded to mortal terror with music. The first Vorthak probe ships descended toward the planet's surface. These were heavily armed vessels designed to test planetary defenses and demonstrate the futility of resistance. Each one carried enough firepower to level a city. The humans opened fire when the ships entered the upper atmosphere. What followed challenged everything Kethvar thought he knew about warfare. The humans didn't fight like any species in the galactic database. They didn't use standard tactics or conventional strategies. Instead, they fought like the planet itself had become alive and angry. Hidden weapons emplacements emerged from seemingly natural rock formations. The very forests seemed to explode with defensive fire as camouflaged installations revealed themselves. The beautiful lakes turned out to be concealing underwater missile batteries. But it was the humans themselves that truly defied comprehension. They fought with a ferocity that made Kethvar's diplomatic training completely inadequate. When a Vorthak landing craft managed to breach the colony's perimeter, the response wasn't a tactical withdrawal or a call for reinforcements. Instead, a human woman, a teacher according to the colony records, charged the landing site with nothing but a farming tool and what appeared to be homemade explosives. She killed 6 Vorthak warriors before they finally brought her down. Her death was broadcast across the colony's communication network. Kethvar expected this to break human morale, to finally introduce the fear that any rational species would feel. Instead, the humans began fighting harder. "Sir," Reldos transmitted, his mental voice barely controlled. "I'm detecting something impossible. The humans, their biological readings, they're not showing fear." Kethvar checked the sensors himself. Bioscans of the human population showed elevated heart rates, increased adrenaline, heightened neural activity. All normal stress responses. But the pattern was wrong. These weren't the biological markers of terror or desperation. They were the readings of predators who had found prey. More Vorthak ships descended, convinced that overwhelming force would finally break human resistance. Each landing was met with increasingly creative and violent responses. Humans used their own infrastructure as weapons, turning irrigation systems into flamethrowers, converting mining equipment into improvised artillery. A group of human children, none older than 15, managed to capture an intact Vorthak drop ship. Instead of studying it or hiding from it, they somehow figured out how to pilot it and began using it to attack other Vorthak positions. When the ship was finally destroyed, the children escaped and were back in action within hours, having apparently learned enough about Vorthak technology to start building countermeasures. "This is impossible," Reldos transmitted. "They're civilians, farmers and teachers and shopkeepers. How are they doing this?" Kethvar was beginning to understand, and the realization made him want to flee back to the safety of council space. He had been thinking about this all wrong. The humans weren't civilians who were fighting. They were warriors who had been temporarily pretending to be civilians. Every human on New Eden had been trained for this moment. Not just the adults, but the children too. Their schools weren't just teaching reading and mathematics, but tactics and weapons maintenance. Their farmers weren't just growing crops, but studying the most efficient ways to fortify agricultural settlements. Their doctors weren't just learning to heal, but to fight on even when wounded. The entire colony was a carefully constructed trap, designed to look peaceful and vulnerable, while actually being a military installation disguised as a civilian settlement. As the battle raged through the day, more disturbing details emerged. The humans had prepared for casualties they couldn't prevent. Medical facilities were pre-positioned in concealed locations. Supply caches had been distributed throughout the settlement. Even their children knew exactly what to do if their parents were killed. But perhaps most unsettling of all was the way they fought for each other. When a section of the defensive perimeter was overrun, humans from across the colony abandoned their own positions to reinforce it. When medical supplies ran low in one area, civilians from safer zones made dangerous runs through active combat zones to deliver what was needed. They weren't just defending territory. They were defending every single member of their community as if the loss of even one person was unacceptable. By nightfall, the Vorthak had lost 37 ships and nearly 2,000 warriors. The human casualties were much lighter, but what shocked Kethvar was their response to their own losses. Where any other species would be mourning or breaking down, the humans seemed to be getting angrier. The final transmission of the day came from Governor Chen herself. Her voice was hoarse from combat, and bioscans showed she was injured. But when she spoke, her words carried across the galaxy and changed everything. "Vorthak Commander, this is Governor Chen. You've killed 18 of our people today. 18 teachers, parents, and children who came to this world seeking peace. I want you to understand something very clearly. You have awakened something in humanity that we hoped we'd never have to show the galaxy. Tomorrow, we stop playing defense." The transmission ended, leaving the diplomatic station in absolute silence. Kethvar stared at the tactical displays, trying to process what he had witnessed. The humans had fought an entire day against overwhelming odds and somehow held their ground. But that wasn't what terrified him. What terrified him was the promise in Governor Chen's voice. The humans hadn't been fighting at full capacity. Everything he had witnessed, the impossible courage, the tactical brilliance, the absolute refusal to yield, had been restrained. Tomorrow, they were going to show the galaxy what humans looked like when they stopped holding back. The second day of the battle for New Eden began before dawn, when the humans did something that shattered every tactical doctrine in the galactic military database. They attacked. Kethvar was reviewing casualty reports when the first alerts reached the diplomatic station. Reldos burst into his private quarters, his normally composed mental voice crackling with disbelief. "Ambassador, you need to see this immediately. The humans, they've launched some kind of assault on the Vorthack fleet." Kethvar rushed to the observation deck, his scales rippling with confusion. No planetary force attacked a superior space fleet. It was beyond suicide. It was impossible. Ground-based weapons simply couldn't reach orbital positions with enough force to matter. The tactical display told a different story. 18 human craft were ascending from New Eden's surface, moving on intercept courses with Vorthack vessels. But these weren't the sleek military fighters found in any galactic database. They appear to be civilian shuttles and cargo haulers, modified with weapons systems that shouldn't exist. How did they get into space? Kethvar demanded. The colony manifest showed no military spacecraft. "Sir, according to our scans, they've converted their agricultural equipment. Those are farming shuttles or haulers that have been weaponized with salvaged Vorthack technology from yesterday's battles." Kethvar watched in stunned silence as the improvised human fleet engaged Vorthack patrol ships. The humans were outnumbered 20-1, operating in vessels never designed for combat, facing an enemy with thousands of years of military experience. They were winning. The first human shuttle, piloted by someone the colony database identified as a wheat farmer named Marcus Webb, somehow managed to disable a Vorthack destroyer 3 times its size. Instead of using conventional weapons, Webb had apparently figured out how to hack the bioship's neural network using what looked like a modified irrigation control system. "This is impossible," Reldos transmitted. "The Vorthack bioships have anti-intrusion systems that have never been breached. How is a farmer doing what the Keltharian Empire's best hackers couldn't accomplish?" But that was only the beginning. As more human craft reached the battle zone, they began demonstrating tactics that defied every principle of space warfare. They fought in perfect coordination despite having no formal military training. They anticipated Vorthack maneuvers before the bioships even began them. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to understand Vorthack technology better than species that had been fighting them for centuries. Sarah Chen's voice crackled over the communication array from her position commanding the surface defenses. "Marcus, Vector 77 Mark 12. Lisa, need you to provide cover for the Eastern Quadrant. Jim, take your team and hit their command vessel. They've got kids aboard one of their ships." Kethvar's blood froze. The humans had somehow detected that the Vorthack were carrying prisoners from another world, information that hadn't appeared on any of the diplomatic station sensors. "How could they possibly know that?" he whispered to Reldos. The answer came from an unexpected source. One of the human fighters broke away from the main battle and approached the diplomatic station. Kethvar's security systems activated automatically, but the human pilot transmitted on standard diplomatic frequencies. "Diplomatic vessel, this is Colonel Sarah Martinez, formerly of the Sol Defense Force. Request permission to come aboard. We need to talk." The title stopped Kethvar cold. "Colonel, Sol Defense Force." According to every record the Galactic Council possessed, humanity had no formal military beyond basic planetary defense. There was no mention of a Sol Defense Force anywhere in their files. Let her aboard, Kethvar decided. He needed to understand what they were really dealing with. Colonel Martinez was not what he expected. Medium height for a human, with graying hair and kind eyes that belonged on a grandmother, not a military officer. She wore simple civilian clothes, stained with oil, and what looked like Vorthack blood. When she spoke, her voice carried the same calm certainty that had made Governor Chen's threats so chilling. Ambassador Kethvar, thank you for receiving me. I apologize for the deception, but we needed to know whether the galaxy would respond to a human colony under attack. Deception. Kethvar's scales shifted to a defensive pattern. What deception? Martinez gestured toward the viewport, where human fighters were systematically dismantling Vorthack vessels with impossible efficiency. New Eden isn't a civilian colony, Ambassador. It's a military outpost staffed by retired Soul Defense personnel and their families. We've been here for 3 years, not 3 decades. The revelation hit Kethvar like a physical blow. That's impossible. Our surveys showed agricultural settlements, families with children, schools and hospitals and farms. All real, Martinez confirmed. My husband really is a teacher. Our neighbor Sarah really does grow the best tomatoes in the sector. Our children really do attend school and play games and worry about their homework. Her expression hardened. But we're also all veterans of a war you don't know about. What war? Reldos demanded, his mental voice tight with controlled panic. Martinez was quiet for a long moment, watching as a human cargo hauler somehow managed to capture an intact Vorthack cruiser using what appeared to be a modified tractor beam originally designed for moving asteroids. 20 years ago, humanity encountered a species called the Devourers. They came from outside this galaxy, moved through space, consuming everything in their path. Planets, stars, entire solar systems. They were absolutely unstoppable. Kethvar had never heard of such a species, but the way Martinez spoke about them made his scales crawl. The Devourers reached our home system and began consuming Earth's moon. We had maybe 6 months before they finished with Luna and started on our planet. 6 months to save our entire species. Through the viewport, another human fighter had somehow convinced 3 Vorthack vessels to surrender by transmitting what looked like mathematical equations. The bioships were actually powering down their weapons and requesting asylum. What did you do? Kethvar asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer would be something he didn't want to hear. We evolved, Martinez said simply. Every human on Earth, every person in our colonies, every child old enough to understand the threat. We became something we'd never been before. We became a species at war. She touched something on her belt, and a holographic display appeared between them. It showed star charts with vast, empty regions where solar systems used to exist. It took us 12 years, but we won. We drove the Devourers back beyond the galactic rim, destroyed their ability to consume worlds, made them understand that Earth and everything we claimed was permanently off limits. How does vi spirit? Martinez's smile was gentle and absolutely terrifying. We learned to fight the way they fought. We became willing to sacrifice anything, pay any price, use any method necessary to protect what we loved. We discovered that when you threaten a human's family, you don't just face that individual human. You face the entire species. The implications crashed over Kethvar like a tsunami. The other species that encountered humanity, the ones that fled or demanded alliance, recognized what we are, Martinez confirmed. We're not a peaceful farming species that can fight when pressed. We're a warrior species that chooses to farm when we're not threatened. On the tactical display, the battle was reaching its conclusion. The Vorthack fleet was either destroyed, captured, or fleeing. Total human casualties from 2 days of fighting against overwhelming odds. 23 dead, 47 wounded. Vorthack casualties were in the thousands. The children, Kethvar said, his voice barely a whisper. Your children were fighting alongside adults. Our children learn early that freedom isn't free, Martinez replied. They understand that sometimes good people have to do terrible things to protect what matters. They know that being human means being willing to stand between the darkness and the light, no matter the cost. A new transmission came through the communication array. Governor Chen's voice, tired but triumphant. Diplomatic station, this is New Eden. The Vorthack commander has requested terms for surrender. We're transmitting the coordinates of 17 species currently held in Vorthack slave camps. We'll need assistance with rescue operations. Kethvar stared at the displays, showing Vorthak vessels limping away from New Eden, while others remained as capture vessels. 17 species. The Vorthak liked to keep trophies, Martinez explained. Samples of the populations they'd conquered. We'll be returning them to their home worlds, along with detailed intelligence about Vorthak military capabilities and territorial holdings. The colonel stood to leave, but paused at the airlock. Ambassador, the Galactic Council is going to have questions about humanity. I'll save you some trouble. Yes, we're dangerous. Yes, we're capable of things that will disturb other species. But we're also the species that spent 12 years fighting something worse than the Vorthak to protect people we'd never met. What do you want from the galaxy? Kethvar asked. Martinez's expression softened, becoming almost maternal. What we've always wanted. To farm our crops, raise our children, and live in peace. But now the galaxy knows what happens if someone threatens that peace. After she left, Kethvar stood alone in the observation deck, watching as human vessels began rescue operations on the captured Vorthak ships. The farmers and teachers were treating wounded Vorthak warriors with the same careful attention they'd given their own casualties. Sir, Heldus transmitted hesitantly. What do we report to the Council? Kethvar considered the question. How did you explain to an ancient galactic civilization that they had just witnessed a species capable of appearing as harmless civilians while simultaneously possessing military capabilities that exceeded most standing armies? How did you describe beings who could spend the day destroying an imperial fleet and then tend their gardens in the evening? The truth, he decided. We tell them that humanity is exactly as dangerous as the other species believed, and exactly as peaceful as they claim to be. On the surface of New Eden, families were reuniting. Parents were checking on their children, neighbors were helping neighbors repair damage from the battle, and someone was apparently starting dinner because the atmospheric sensors were detecting the chemical signatures of cooking food. From space, it looked exactly like what it claimed to be, a peaceful farming community. The only evidence of the battle was the small cemetery where 23 new graves had been dug, and the Vorthak prisoners receiving medical treatment in the colony's hospital. Kethvar realized that this was perhaps the most terrifying thing about humanity. They could fight a war that would be remembered across the galaxy, then return to their normal lives as if nothing had happened. Because for them, this really was normal. The question that would haunt him for the rest of his life wasn't whether humanity was dangerous. He had his answer to that. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for a species that could be utterly peaceful and absolutely lethal depending on the circumstances. As if reading his thoughts, Martinez's voice came through the communication array one final time. Oh, and Ambassador? New Eden really is a farming community. If you're ever in the sector again, try our tomatoes. Sarah grows them with love. Kethvar stared at the peaceful colony below and began composing his report to the Galactic Council. Somehow, he knew that everything was about to change. 6 months after the battle for New Eden, Kethvar stood before the assembled Galactic Council in the ancient Chamber of Voices, preparing to deliver the most important testimony of his career. Representatives from 437 species filled the vast amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, hums, mental projections, and bioluminescent displays. The question before the council was simple. What should galactic civilization do about humanity? In the months since his report, the galaxy had been in chaos. The rescue of 17 enslaved species from Vorthak camps had triggered a wave of uprisings across the Empire. 3 more major powers had fallen when their own subjugated populations learned that resistance was possible. The ancient order that had maintained stability for millennia was crumbling, and it was all because of a farming colony that grew excellent tomatoes. Ambassador Kethvar announced Council Speaker Zethmore, her crystalline form pulsing with official authority. You have observed humanity directly. The Council requires your assessment. Are they a threat to galactic civilization? Kethvar activated his translation matrix and began the testimony that would reshape how the galaxy understood itself. Honored Council, to answer that question, I must first share what I learned during my extended observation of the New Eden colony after the Vorthack incident. The amphitheater fell silent as Kethvar activated the holographic displays. Images appeared above the assembly. Human children playing in gardens, adults working in fields, families sharing meals under alien stars. For 4 months, I remained in orbit around New Eden, studying the humans in their daily lives. What I witnessed challenges every assumption we hold about the relationship between military capability and social organization. The first video showed a human child, no more than 8 years old, helping her grandmother with what appeared to be routine garden maintenance. Kethvar enhanced the display to show the tool the child was using, a modified plasma welder disguised as a simple watering device. The humans live in a state of what they call peaceful readiness. Every aspect of their society serves dual purposes. Their farming equipment can become weapons. Their children's education includes tactical training disguised as games. Their medical facilities are designed to function as field hospitals. Murmurs rippled through the council chamber. The Threnodidae representative pulsed alarmed orange. This suggests a militaristic society that has deceived us about its nature. No, Kethvar replied firmly. That's what I initially believed, and I was wrong. Watch this. The next video showed what appeared to be a celebration. Humans of all ages gathered in the colony's central square, sharing food, music, and what their database identified as jokes. Children played games while adults discussed everything from crop rotation to philosophical concepts. Elderly humans told stories that made their listeners laugh with genuine joy. These same people who dismantled the Vorthack fleet were celebrating the birthday of a child named Emma Chun, Governor Chen's daughter. The party lasted 3 days. They gave gifts, shared memories, and the entire colony participated in what can only be described as pure happiness. The hegemony representative, a massive insectoid creature, clicked its mandibles skeptically. Deception. Military discipline masked as civilian celebration. I thought so too, Kethvar admitted. So I began monitoring their private communications, their personal interactions, their behavior when they believed no one was watching. The holographic display shifted to show humans in unguarded moments. A father teaching his daughter to repair a hydroponic system, explaining each component with patient love. 2 elderly humans sitting together watching the sunset, holding hands while they talked about memories from Earth. A teenager helping a neighbor harvest crops, singing while he worked. There was no deception. Honored Council. The humans weren't pretending to be peaceful farmers. They are peaceful farmers. They're also capable warriors, devoted parents, skilled engineers, talented artists, and about 47 other things I observed during my stay. The silence in the chamber was uncomfortable. Species across the galaxy built their identities around single primary characteristics. The Vorthack were conquerors. The Keltharian were traders. The Threnodidae were scholars. The concept of a species that could be multiple things simultaneously was unsettling. But their military capabilities pressed the Confederation delegate. Surely these indicate their true nature. Kethvar had anticipated this question. He activated another display, this one showing a conversation he'd recorded between 2 human parents. The woman was Lieutenant Colonel Jessica Martinez, whom he'd met during the battle. The man was Dr. David Martinez, a botanist specializing in alien plant adaptation. They were discussing their 7-year-old son's education. Should we start Michael on advanced tactical training this year? Jessica asked. He's showing real aptitude for spatial thinking. David considered while examining a sample of local flora. Let's see how he does with basic electronics first. If he's more interested in engineering than strategy, we shouldn't push the military track. Good point, Jessica agreed. Though either way, he needs to understand responsibility. Maybe have him help with the community garden project. Perfect. And if he wants to learn about defensive systems, he can help me with the greenhouse security grid. Make it educational rather than just training. Kethvar paused the recording. This conversation reveals the fundamental truth about humanity that terrifies other species. They don't raise warriors or farmers or scientists. They raise humans, and humans are expected to be capable of whatever their community needs. The implications rippled through the assembly like shock waves. The Altarian delegate projected distress patterns. This suggests a species without specialized castes, without defined social roles, without order. Exactly, Kethvar confirmed. And that's why humanity terrifies the galaxy. Not because they're more aggressive than other species, but because they're more adaptable. Every human is a potential soldier, farmer, scientist, artist, parent, and philosopher. They don't have to choose. He activated the final set of recordings, these from the aftermath of the Vorthak battle. Humans were simultaneously rebuilding damaged structures, treating wounded prisoners, analyzing captured technology, composing songs about the battle, researching better crop yields, and teaching their children mathematics. The humans don't see these activities as contradictory, Kethvar explained. Colonel Martinez spent the morning interrogating Vorthak prisoners about slave camp locations, then spent the afternoon helping her son with a school project about stellar mechanics. Governor Chen coordinated the liberation of 3 occupied worlds, then returned home to cook dinner for her family. The chamber erupted in chaotic communication as species tried to process this information. The concept challenged everything they understood about social organization and individual identity. Council Speaker Zeth Moore restored order with a pulse of authority. Ambassador, you still have not answered the central question. Are humans a threat to galactic civilization? Kethvar took a breath, knowing his next words would be recorded in galactic history. Honor Council, humans are absolutely a threat to galactic civilization as it currently exists, but not in the way we fear. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The threat isn't that humans will conquer us. The threat is that they'll show other species what we could become. A new display activated, showing footage from across the galaxy. Vorthak slave populations weren't just being liberated by human forces. They were learning to liberate themselves, using principles humans had shared about organized resistance. Former subject species were establishing their own colonies, modeling their settlements on New Eden's dual-purpose design. In 6 months, 17 species have reformed their social structures based on human examples. They're teaching their children to be adaptable rather than specialized. They're building communities that can shift from peaceful to defensive as circumstances require. They're discovering that individuals don't have to be limited to single roles. The hegemon representative clicked alarm signals. This undermines the natural order. Specialization creates stability. Defined roles prevent conflict. Does it? Ketvar shalinget. The natural order you describe allowed the Vorthak to enslave dozens of species for centuries. It permitted the Keltharian trade wars to devastate entire sectors. It created a galaxy where most species live in fear of becoming either predators or prey. He gestured toward the displays showing liberated worlds. Humans offer a third option, being both powerful enough to defend what you value and peaceful enough to enjoy it. The chamber fell quiet as the implications sank in. For millennia, galactic civilization had been built on the assumption that species must choose between strength and peace, between military power and cultural development, between security and freedom. Humanity suggested that choice was false. What do you recommend, Ambassador? Council Speaker Zethmore asked. Kethvar had been preparing for this question for months. The galaxy can choose to fear humanity and attempt to contain them, which will likely fail and certainly cause unnecessary conflict. Or we can choose to learn from them. Learn what? Demanded the Threnodai representative. That civilization doesn't have to be fragile. That peace doesn't require helplessness. That a species can be capable of great violence and great love simultaneously. Ketvar posted. That maybe after all these millennia, we don't actually know the limits of what galactic civilization could become. The debate that followed lasted 3 days. Some species argued for containing humanity through economic isolation. Others proposed military action to prevent the spread of human influence. A few suggested simply avoiding human space entirely. In the end, the council reached a decision that surprised everyone, including Kethvar. They voted to offer humanity membership in the Galactic Council, not as junior partners or probationary members, but as full equals with the same rights and responsibilities as species that had been part of galactic civilization for millions of years. The reasoning, as Council Speaker Zethmore explained, was simple. If humanity represents the future of galactic civilization, then galactic civilization should learn to adapt to humanity rather than expecting humanity to limit itself to our current understanding. Kethvar found himself assigned as the Council's primary liaison to human space, a position that required him to spend half his time on various human worlds. It was during one of these visits to a human colony called New Harmony that he finally understood the last piece of the puzzle. He was observing a human school when a child approached him. She couldn't have been older than 10, with bright, curious eyes and dirt on her hand from the garden where the class had been learning about soil chemistry. "Ambassador Kethvar," she said, using his name with the casual confidence that human children seem to possess. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, young human. Are you scared of us?" The question was so direct, so innocent, that Kethvar found himself answering honestly. "Sometimes, yes." She nodded seriously, as if this made perfect sense. "My mom says that's okay. She says being a little scared helps you pay attention to what's really important." "And what do you think is really important?" he asked. The child considered this with the gravity that humans seem to apply to all questions, regardless of who asked them. "I think it's important that people take care of each other. And I think that means being strong enough to protect the people you love, but also being gentle enough that they're not afraid of you." She paused, then added with devastating simplicity, "Maybe the galaxy is scared because it forgot how to be both things at the same time." Kethvar stared at this 10-year-old child who had just summarized the fundamental challenge facing galactic civilization with more clarity than 3 days of council debates. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I think you may be right." She beamed at him with genuine pleasure. "Would you like to see my tomatoes? I'm growing them for the school fair, and my grandmother says they're going to be the best in the sector." As Kethvar followed the child to her garden plot, watching her explain her cultivation techniques with the same enthusiasm he'd seen human adults display when describing defensive strategies, he realized that humanity didn't terrify the galaxy because they were dangerous. They terrified the galaxy because they were proof that being dangerous and being good weren't mutually exclusive. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what the galaxy needed to learn. In his final report to the Council, Kethvar wrote, "Humanity's greatest gift to galactic civilization may not be their military prowess or their technological adaptability. It may be their demonstration that a species can choose to be whatever their circumstances require while never losing sight of what they truly value. They have shown us that strength and gentleness, peace and vigilance, individual capability and community cooperation are not contradictory forces, but complementary aspects of a mature civilization. The question facing the galaxy is not whether we can coexist with humanity. The question is whether we can evolve to be worthy of the example they have set." The report concluded with a single image: 10-year-old Emma Chun, standing in her tomato garden, holding a ripe red fruit in one hand and a datapad displaying defensive schematics in the other, smiling with the pure joy of a child who knew she was loved, protected, and free to become anything she chose to be. It was, Kethvar reflected, the most terrifying and beautiful thing he had ever seen.